Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another breakfast with Blaha. And today, having fat-free Greek yogurt, almond butter, milled flax seeds. There's not much left in this bowl though, because I'm doing 3 of these this morning. So let's talk a little bit about quads. I've had people chime in, and it may not be what I'm doing by the time this video comes out, but as of late, I have more and more just dropped my supplemental quad work, supplemental squatting work, and I find myself just doing sled drags, and I've been doing them every day. I think at this point, I'm like day 16 or 17 in a row of doing sled drags every day. And I do box squats, and it's mostly my speed boxes. And the question gets brought up by a few people, are you getting enough quad work? It's like, well, look at my quads. And this is the thing when it comes to quads. They don't need as much specialized work as people think they do. Barring a weak link. And there are some people who their quads are truly a weak link in their squat. But we address those things on a case-by-case basis. And in the case of someone like me, I want to get conditioning and I want good GPP. So I do relatively short burst heavy sled drags. And when we look at that from a hypertrophy perspective, I've had some people say, well, is that enough for quad growth? Sure it is. My quads are big. My quads, if anything, have gotten bigger since doing it slightly again. They've come back up. Because my quads were getting smaller while I was cutting early on. People outside of YouTube noticed it. Like it was noticed they were getting smaller in spite of all the single leg exercises. But they seem to have come back up from adding the sled drags back in. They're like, but that's a partial. Well, partials still build muscle. Like, people know this, right? Does full range of motion usually have more hypertrophic potential? Yes. Yes, no one is denying that. It does. But joint angle specificity matters here too. And like right now, I'm wanting to deadlift specialize a little bit. What do we get on a sled drag? Oh, we're getting quad angles similar to the deadlift. By the way, deadlifts hypertrophy your quads. That is a fact. For the unaware, they are still a quad exercise. But when we look at the joint angle specifics, that sled drag matches a deadlift. It also has no eccentric, just like a deadlift. There's some good specificity there, right? But that's the thing when it comes to the sled dragging itself. It's no eccentric. So we can do relatively hard amounts of volume. So if you're doing a good sled drag every day, that's a decent amount of quad volume and calf. Decent amount of volume happening there without an eccentric, which means you don't get sore from it and you recover faster. Right? There's a certain benefits to concentric only training. Right? Particularly if you want to get more volume in. It's easier to recover from. So again, we don't get sore, we don't get micro tears and things, the same muscle damage, but we still get a hypertrophic stimulus. Again, especially if we're doing a high enough intensity of it. It carries over. Right? I count every sled drag session as 1 set for my quads. So it's about 7 sets for quads a week. Okay? That's how I personally count it. But it is my cardio, it's my GPP. But then we come back over, so what else? We're doing box squats with it. Well, box squat is a full range of motion. Yes, I'm doing it wide, but I am going below parallel. Yes, we sit back so there's a little less knee bend, but we're getting good quad stimulus of all those speed boxes. Right? And of course, the speed pulls do the same thing. When you start adding it up, I'm getting plenty of quad work. And the question we have to ask is it enough to grow? Yes, it's enough to grow on. Is it specific? All right? Because we could argue about the deeper bend in the quad and all of that affecting the bottom of our squat. Quads don't limit us further up the squat. Once you get that weight moving out of the hole, what really matters? Hip extension, back. Quads really only help get you started out of the bottom. Well, I'm doing all this speed work. I'm also focusing on more and more of real wide stance and forward lean again to help use adductors to drive me out of the hole. Well, if that's the case, then my squat is fine. And my quads are not a weak link. Again, come back over and point out to people, my quads are massive. So for someone like me who has big quads, this is more than sufficient. In fact, it's enough to keep them growing. And it allows someone who's in that situation, if your quads are not a weak link, this allows you to focus then on other muscles more. Okay, and let's talk about even squatting. What are the main primary movers in the squat? Not the quads. Quads are a primary mover, but if we look at the data, they're the third primary mover. Okay? They're the third primary mover. Adductors and glutes. And this is not looking at power squatting. I want people to understand when I make this statement, we're talking about Olympic squats, or what a lot of you call high bar squats. Okay? That's what the data on those squats shows. Those muscles grow more, they activate more. It's not a lot more, but it's more. The push come to shove, those are the ones that are really going to move the weight. Now, we can make the argument without sufficient evidence, by the way. When we start going to a wide stance power squat, they matter even more, particularly the adductors, in which case we could argue the adductor is the most important muscle. But if we're handling our quads just with this other stuff, this means all the supplemental work can focus on the rest of it. What's the rest of it? Adductors and glutes as primary movers. What about the most important stabilizers to help you maintain the best bar path so that you can use the adductors more? Hamstrings and erectors. And we can put all of our training focus in hip extensors, right? We covered those already. Hamstrings, low back, right? Gives us more bang for our buck then. If the quads are big enough and they're still growing, we don't need to focus on them as much. What about then for deadlifting? We can put all this focus in exercises that build the deadlift. Because deadlifting beats you up. We can't do a lot of deadlifting, realistically. It's not the best way to build a big deadlift. Right? I've seen someone who trash talks me online who does tons of linear block periodization on squat, bench, deadlift. He squats and deadlifts less than me. Same body weight. Which I thought was kind of funny. Okay? Because that's not the way to build a deadlift. See, this is a sub 600 puller. It doesn't work. Not ideal. You can do high specificity heavy deadlifting, sure, but you better be doing a bunch of hypertrophy work with it. And this allows us to focus in on those things to get better deadlift carryover. And incidentally, all those muscles we use to build the deadlift have carryover to the squat, as long as your quads aren't limiting you. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.